I remember feeling there were times for sure of what am I motivated by here? I'm motivated not just fear of I want to create this great environment for my kid, but at the root of that, I had to explore what was going on inside of me. And so as we work with our kids, it's always an opportunity. God is always saying, like, what's happening in you right now as you're parenting them? What's going on inside of you, Eliza? Because are you trusting me? You want your child to trust God. But are you trusting me? Do you trust me enough to let him struggle a little bit in this? Do you trust me enough to not have the answers? And a lot of the fear had a lot to do with, what do people perceive of me as a parent?
I'm Dr. Danny Huerta, Vice President of Parenting and Youth at Focus on the Family, and I'm with Eliza Huie. She's the Director of Counseling at McLean Bible Church and has written several books on very important topics for parents, and has also serves as a professor at various seminaries. And so excited to have you, Eliza.
Oh, thanks.
This is our parenting conversations.
Yeah.
So we get to talk about some important topics in these conversations. Let's talk about emotionally healthy versus emotionally unhealthy children.
Yeah. It's a big deal, right? That's a topic that parents are really feeling a lot of pressure with, I would say, more so than even, so I have 3 children. They're all in their 20s and one getting close to 30.
Ooh, nice.
And I don't remember feeling this much pressure as far as around the area of emotional health with my kids when they were younger, as parents do. So
true.
I definitely feel for them. I definitely want to provide them with whatever resources I can. I definitely want to be a help in that. But first, I just want to say, like, yeah, it's a heavy topic, but an important one. So yeah, emotionally healthy kids is something that I think most parents want. Obviously, we want our kids to be healthy in every way, but we don't always feel like we have the tools to do that.
Right. And there's so much advice.
There is.
I mean, so parents are inundated with advice. You can see things on Instagram and on YouTube, and then at church, maybe some people talk about these different methods and different theories, and each child is so unique, so different. Emotions are real, and they're usually responding to something deeper. Let's talk about that. Where do emotions come from? How do we even have them?
Well, emotions come from God. He has created us as emotional beings, so we want to recognize that as they're not bad. But what I want to encourage parents is that anytime you see an emotional response to your child, especially a response that maybe is a little bit upsetting or maybe a little bit overwhelming for you, you are getting a picture into your child's heart. So view emotions as a little glimpse inside of your child. So I always encourage parents, this is an opportunity. It's an opportunity for you to move into something that you're getting a little bit deeper into the child. So that's probably a reframe that can be helpful, is it's a window inside of our kids' hearts, really.
Yeah, it's a signal, right? There's a thought behind it. There's a belief. There's a perception. There's some depth that you can plumb as a parent and explore with curiosity.
Right.
So what makes an unhealthy emotional child?
Yeah, none of us want that, right?
Yeah, what does that look like?
The thing that comes to my mind most is that, does this child feel like they can't actually talk about or express their emotions? And we can talk about, like, what is healthy expression of emotion, because I'm sure that probably gets parents thinking, like, wait a minute, my kid expresses a lot. But we want an emotionally unhealthy child really is unable to express those feelings, or doesn't feel safe to, or feels a lot of shame around that. So that's one picture of an emotionally unhealthy child, a child who's maybe doesn't have a real good grasp on what emotions are for and how to manage them. But also one who expresses too big or too much, or it feels more than what fits the occasion. Sometimes that can also be a picture that there's maybe some unhealth going on there
too.
too.
Big reactiveness, that's what you're saying. I've noticed that with some kids, there's a ton of negativity. Everything seems to create a meltdown with that child. There's a perception that's been built either over time or through trauma or genetically. And parents can feel a sense of shame or a feeling of not being control of situations, and so they feel embarrassment around other parents. And sometimes they choose not to go out then. And parents, if this sounds like your situation or close to it, and you want to talk this through with someone, we have a family helpline. It's 1-800-232-6459. Again, 1-800-232-6459. Call it, it's free. And you can spend some time with somebody just listening in on where you're at and giving you some ideas, maybe some referrals in your area. So Eliza, when you're thinking about these kids that are in those moments of dysregulation, they're just popping.
Yeah.
What do you advise a parent do? Because in that moment, you can't control that.
Right. It feels very out of control, doesn't it?
Yes, it does. What's the response like? What do you think?
Well, one of the things that I tell parents, I actually heard this as a bit of advice from me, and it has resonated and I've held on to it, is one of the best things that you can give a dysregulated child, a child who's out of control emotionally, is a regulated parent. So first and foremost is deal with what's going on inside of you. And as I mentioned before, how emotions are like a window into the heart of a child, and so it gives us an opportunity to see the child. It's also an opportunity for us as parents. And we may not like to think of it that way because it's kind of like, I didn't ask for this opportunity. I didn't want this opportunity. And here it is. But it's an opportunity for us to slow down and to really think about, what does it look like for me to model good emotional responses, even when things are really upsetting. And so, the best thing that a parent can give a dysregulated child is a regulated parent.
Yes.
Yeah.
With guidance still in there, I've noticed some parents decide not to correct or not do certain things because they're afraid of the response. And so then the child is sometimes using that to control the environment. And so we want to be wise as parents, entering in regulated, calm, but knowing what is it that we're asking? Why is this emotion showing up?
Yeah.
This a learned behavior, what's happening, and understanding it with compassion and with love. It's that balanced parent, right? You're entering with love, with understanding, with compassion, but also with boundaries and limits.
Right.
And that's a hard balance to come in, especially when you're feeling a little stressed.
And it is good. Like those boundaries are necessary. One of the things that's really important for parents is to be consistent. And if you're going to set something, make sure you can follow through, because in that moment, you can say things like, you're not going to play your video games for the rest of your life.
Right.
Well, can you follow through with that? Because sometimes you end up using that as a means to kind of help you get something done or whatever, so you want to make sure that you're going to be consistent with what you say, and the kids need that. So if you're telling them this is what happens when you respond this way, well, then you got to make sure that happens. So as a parent, think through, what are some of the things that I can reasonably do in those situations and follow through with, even when the situation keeps happening repeatedly. So making sure you're consistent, making sure that it's manageable and reachable as well. Sometimes parents like to, and I'm not opposed to this, sometimes parents like to give options. Now you're still parenting because you're the one giving the option, but options that are within those boundaries that you see are appropriate. So you can sit here and eat your food, or you can not have dinner tonight. Those are your options or whatever, They're different scenarios, but
putting the options that are possible.
So they get a little bit of agency with staying within the realm of, this is mom and dad's decision in this.
And sometimes kids just need those options.
They really do.
And some rails to stay within, and you need to be okay with either of the options.
Yeah, right.
And I remember just with some kids that I've worked with in my practice, this parenting hack, just thinking of that could be a helpful thing for a parent in this situation. And that is, if a child is completely locked in, their emotions are spilling, they're over-focused on this one thing, and they're almost in a tantrum place, even if they're almost a teenager. Figure out what they're very interested in, and out of your back pocket, just bring out some facts that are just random facts.
About the thing.
Hey, did you know that T-Rexes had this many teeth? Did you know that? And your child will think you're going to be reacting to their emotions, but if you bring a fact, you're bringing their brain into that thinking side without them knowing it, and now it's kind of rattled that emotional brain that's stuck. And it's been fascinating to see kids correct their parents, go, no, that's not right. And then they're going to something different, and they've disengaged from this place of being stuck.
Right.
I think as parents we can be very creative with this, but there's an unhealthy side, and that's the part I want to help parents distinguish. Sometimes it's behavioral, sometimes it's physiological and genetic.
Yeah.
And the child truly needs some help with an imbalance that's happening inside of them. How can a parent distinguish between the two and decide, man, we need to go find some help because this is beyond some parenting techniques at this point?
Yeah, let me answer that by even adding one more category as well that sometimes is in play is understanding your child's capacity. Because there might be some other things going on, but sometimes I think we can, as parents, be expecting maybe more than that child can handle in that moment, or maybe even in that stage.
Give us an example. What would you say?
Yeah, so in a lot of ways, like I remember, so this is going to be something personal. I remember when my youngest was a teenager, and I was reading this book on just like how the teenage brain works and so forth. And I remember coming across something where it was talking about the amount of hormones that a teenager, their brain sees during that phase of life is like, I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was a ridiculous amount more, like 7 times more than is normal. And it went on to explain how that affects the body, as you kind of even mentioned, physiologically and so forth. And I remember thinking, I looked at my son, who was at the time, I think 17 or maybe 18, and I just looked at him and I said, I'm so sorry. And he kind of laughed and we talked about it. But it was helpful.
Such a connecting moment.
Yeah, it really was. And it was helpful for me to see that sometimes it has to do with capacity. And this kid is flooded with hormones right now. So I'm not going to take this personally. That would be a better thing for parents to like, don't take it so personal. Maybe there is something that in this stage of life, like you need to give them certain amounts of information or certain amounts of commands that, hey, I want you to do this. I've seen parents say things like, this is another example of like, I want you to go upstairs, I want you to put your pajamas on, put your dirty clothes in the dirty clothes basket, brush your teeth, and then get the story that you want to read. And like this 3 or 4-year-old's like, so yeah, their brain's like gone. And so understand their capacity. How much can this child actually take in right now? And sometimes that's per child. We might have, you might have 2 or 3 kids in the home and each one is in a different space. It is good to learn a little bit about understanding ages and stages of children because that helps us to parent within that capacity as well. And so a little psychoeducation for parents goes a long way so that we don't expect more, but we also don't expect less. Because I do see sometimes trends expecting less of a child than they can give.
Yeah, well, let's talk about that toddler age. A lot of parents struggle in the 2, 3-year-old range. We talk about terrible 2s and even more terrible 3s.
Yeah, for sure.
What's happening there? There are big things happening developmentally. There really are. And we need, let's talk about that a little bit.
Right, so there's 2 stages in a child's development that their brain goes through the most amount of change. And that is between 2 and 5 and between like 12 and depends how long it lasts in those teenage years. But their brains are seeing more, they're growing at a faster rate, and they're seeing more changes than they have in that infant stage, and then in that middle, what I call the golden years, when your kids think you're really cool and they love to do things with you. And that's like outside of that, toddler age, but before the teenage years. And so in many ways, what you're seeing is this flooded amount of brain growth, if you will, that they don't necessarily have the capacity to really know how to like implement what's happening inside of their brain. It's good that we're seeing it. They're in the ages of like 2 to 5. They're becoming more aware of how other people perceive them. They're more aware of how their behavior impacts others. And it's no longer just they can be quickly distracted. In those really young ages, you can kind of quickly distract them. They want to know why, they want to understand. They're putting logic together in ways that sometimes can actually frustrate them too, when things don't make sense the way they think it should. So that's what I mean by even understanding their capacity. That doesn't give you a pass for bad behavior, but it does help us to parent understanding like there's a lot of changes that are happening in this stage of parenting. And so you're going to see more emotional outbursts in those ages. So I guess what I'm saying is like a 2-year-old kind of looks like a 15-year-old sometimes,
right.
you know?
You know, and they don't have the capacity to really understand. When you say no, the amount of time, like if you say no, you can't have that, they're not seeing that tomorrow I might be able to get that.
Right.
They're saying in the moment I don't have that and it feels like eternity now.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's not enough experience in life to really bump up against and learn how to navigate the emotion you feel and consoling yourself. And so really being able to help our kids put some names to the feeling they're having at that 2-3 year range is so amazing for the 4, 5, 6, 7. That vocabulary is so helpful for those young kids to learn. I remember my daughter, she was about 4 years old, and my wife, she tends to be a little bit more anxious, and so I was kind of somewhat minimizing. She said, you know, our daughter's yelling and upset, and I'm going, I shouldn't have done this, right? That's first rule, don't do that. I said, honey, really, is she popping as much? Well, I got home, and she was in the middle of one of these moments, was screaming, was saying, I hate you, and this scream for like 45 minutes. And if you met her today, she's a wonderful, wonderful young lady. She was having an allergic reaction, and we didn't know that.
Yeah. Wow.
I was going, I don't know what's going on here. I don't know if there's demon possession or something. I mean, I don't know what's happening here.
Sometimes you can feel that way, parenting.
You could tell she didn't feel in control of herself.
Yeah.
And she felt really bad afterwards. I said, we got to get this checked out. So we did go to an allergist to rule that out. Sure enough, we were giving her peanut butter and jelly sandwiches. She was allergic to peanuts. We were giving her sandwiches, which she was allergic to wheat.
Oh, wow.
And barley. So everything she was allergic to, we were giving to her every single day. Her brain was inflamed. She wasn't able to regulate because of that. It was just she couldn't control her emotions. When we took her off of those things, it was a tremendous change. We never saw those things again.
Wow.
Now that one, we could have felt like, man, we need to really parent here. You know, in the grocery store, if that would have happened, that would have been super embarrassing. But it was a physiological thing that was happening.
Yeah.
Then I've met parents with kids with on the autism spectrum. You change the schedule, you do anything to throw that off, and you see a child that is in a very heightened place. I saw one, in fact, attack their dad in the middle of a session. Just had an emotional outburst.
Wow.
Those are challenging moments for those parents. And so what I'm trying to think through here is that parent that is in that place that they know their child is very unstable. What is a first step to take to determine, okay, my child is at a place of beyond me as a parent, now I need to go get some help?
Well, those are good questions.
What would be that first, the first step to kind of rule that out and make that decision?
Well, one of the things you're describing there is something that seems significantly different than normal behavior. So you want to first say, is this just the way my kid sometimes acts out, or does this, like your wife was saying, this does not feel right, like this is really upsetting? So you're looking, is this something beyond just the normal? And if so, then you maybe want to consider things like that. But if you're beginning to see that navigating your child's emotional outbursts or their emotional struggles is kind of taking the majority of your time and your focus, and all of your energies are kind of going into that, that might be a good time to ask to seek out help. And that can sometimes come in the form of a counselor where you can talk with somebody. Certainly that's always an option. I'm a counselor, I advocate for that. But it can also be talking to your pastor, maybe a youth pastor if that's, or a children's pastor if that's available to you, talking to other parents and being able to see like this particular area of my child's behavior seems to kind of be ruling our house right now, and it does seem more than just a stage, you know, that kids do go to. It can be a good time to say, okay, don't do this alone. You need other help. You need people to speak into this, because I think sometimes there can be a lot of shame for parents. They can feel like, why can't my kid behave? These people's kids are behaving just fine, you know, and there's shame and we don't get the help that we need. But my encouragement is don't do it alone. God has given us the body to be a part of and to utilize that body, and even if it's just a a mentor that you see in the church and that you want to be able to talk to can be a big help for
Seek
sure.
some help. I mean, that's really, even if you have some doubts, some inclination where you go, I don't know, find that evaluation, that help. And parents, if you've had some help and you've sought out that counseling, it's been helpful to you, please let us know about it. I mean, we want to know about those stories. Share it within the comments so that parents can be encouraged if they're in this type of situation. Now, Eliza, on that just emotions in general. Yeah. It's a beautiful thing to have emotions. I mean, it adds color to moments. Mm-hmm. I know with my kids, I've loved asking them, hey, what made you frustrated today? Because I learned something from that. You do. What made you feel lonely today? When did you notice loneliness? And what'd you do? And so those questions, like you said, give us insights into our kids. Yeah. What are some ways as your kids were growing up that you tried to explore that emotional life that your kids are living each day? Yeah, and it's such a good thing to do because, and you kind of alluded to it, like giving them names for that. I think as younger kids, they need that help. They need to kind of like, tell me what I'm feeling, help me understand this. And what you're really telling them there is, in this house, we talk about emotions. Yeah. This is something that we can talk about. So in those early ages, you're kind of teaching them that. And obviously emotion wheels can be helpful. There's lots of fun ones out there. Yeah. So those are great, and that is one way. But I do think as they get a little bit older, you still struggle, like I still struggle with, like, what am I feeling right now? Yeah. And so being able to have those conversations, I would encourage parents to not necessarily have it like this, like sit down, what are you feeling right now? Yeah. But do it along the way. Do it as, taking a walk with your child. And the questions that you asked, my kids were exposed to a lot of, I often wonder, like, what was it like growing up with a counselor as your parent? Right, yeah. They were exposed to a lot of, like, let's try this, let's try that. So we used the dinner time to the max for different things. I'm almost embarrassed to say this, but like I would have little prompts on their plates that this is what we're going to talk about tonight, things like that, because especially as they get a little bit older, they need those prompts to kind of like get them in the conversation, so we had a little basket that we kept on our table of conversation prompts that we would have that they could pull out and ask. They get to ask us as well. It wasn't just me asking them, what made you frustrated? Those are great questions. Yeah. What was a high or what was a low today? But they got to ask Mom and they got to ask Dad, and to be able to see that as well. There were lots of different ways that we definitely explored the way we felt and stuff like that, but mostly I would tell you it was along the way as I would take them out for hikes in the afternoon, and they remember it different than I do, because they would often remember, like, no, we don't want to go for a walk again. I'd be like, nope, we're going to go for a walk. And you know what, now how they remember it is, they're like, remember, Mom, how we would go for walks? I loved those walks. It's like, okay, we'll let you remember it that way. But yeah, just being able to take them in places. Driving in the car is another great way to capitalize on conversation, because this is often uncomfortable for kids. They tend to kind of associate it with, I'm in trouble, or, Mom and Dad have to have a talk with me. So driving in the car, doing things, playing a game even, you can do it while you play a game together, just ask a question that kind of draws them out and gets them talking about what makes them feel this way or that way, Using the words is important though. So if you're not familiar as a parent, if you're not familiar with emotion words yourself, because I know a lot of parents that when you start talking about emotions, they are like, I don't even know what I'm feeling. Yeah. Get familiar with it. Start using those terms yourself. Yeah, it's so important to be able to model that. And spouses, you can do that. If you're a single parent, talking about if you are feeling stressed or overwhelmed, go even more specific. Yeah. Right, I'm feeling alone, or I'm feeling like helpless. Yeah. These even more descriptive words. Yeah. You can bring that as you're sharing with your kids where you're at. Yeah. Man, that is gold for them to hear that. I love how you made things fun. Yeah. Around that in the car and at the dinner table. There's so many parents that are very creative. Make sure you share those ideas with all the other parents in this video, because you just shared some. There's so many parents that have these different ways that they've decided to create a culture of talking about emotions and talking about the deeper things.
One thing that I see, I'll say that to parents, and then they'll say, like, especially kids who are maybe like they don't really talk all that much about these things, or maybe they're in a stage, maybe 10, 11, 12 preteens, and they say, well, I ask my kids and they say, I don't know how I feel. I don't know, and that can be so frustrating to a parent. So I encourage parents, well, talk about what they do know. So, and again, maybe when you're driving, you just bring up things that actually help them actually explore how they feel about things. And I always try to connect it with how they feel even in their body. I'm big into that because we actually emote with more than just our like feelings and our words. We emote with our body as well. And so I'll just ask them questions like, do you remember what it's like, or what does it feel like when we're driving and we're going to be late for school, or we're late to take you to practice and you know how your coach is? What are the feelings that you feel then? You're getting them to say those words. Or what does it feel like to you? Can you name what it feels like when you are waiting to see how you did on that test and you're waiting for that grade? What are the feelings that you feel? Or here's one that I like to get into their like body feelings as well. Like, what does it feel like, if you could describe it to me, to walk outside in the rain with your bare feet and having your feet in the mud? Or here's one that always gets a response. I'll say, do you know what it feels like to step on a slug with your bare feet? And they usually respond like, ooh, like you're actually helping them explore how their body responds to experiences in life. Well, those are just normal experiences. Well, that's what's happening in their emotional responses. Their body, not just their body, their mind and their soul is all responding to this. So we're just helping them be more aware of that, to put words to that, so that then when they're in that space, they can understand, okay, this is a reaction to something. And I always want to point them back to God understands these reactions. God cares about these reactions, and God has something to say about these reactions. Yes. So I don't just get to react however I want. God actually has something to say about
and that's
those
an
things.
Important place we've gone. Behaviors are also places where we can explore even deeper.
Yeah.
And we can go back to the emotion, right? If let's say there's sibling conflict, you can say, oh my goodness, let's explore what is it that you're feeling? What are you feeling? Let's explore that a little bit. What were you thinking? And then what do you believe that needs to happen right now? Or what was your belief coming into this? A child may think their perception is, this is my toy, no one should touch it. This one thinks, hey, there's a toy available, I should be able to play with it. And so those are competing perceptions, and help them be able to see that maybe the behaviors come in conflict, but there's so much more to explore in order to understand one another. And that can be done with the 8, 9, 10-year-olds, where that negativity starts to flood a child's brain, where they're beginning to assume people think bad about them, or they start comparing their skill set with other kids, and they start to say, man, I'm stupid, or I'm bad at this. Help them explore deeper into that, into the perception. Where'd you get that? Where'd you get that perception? Where'd you get that thought? Did somebody say it? Was that a conclusion you came up with? Help me understand it a little bit more. Because what's interesting in the middle of emotions, Eliza, that I think would be a fun place to go with you here, is the word trust. I think it's so important to understand how differently our emotions come out when we either trust someone or the environment, or we don't. And emotions play out differently. It could be the same one: anger, sadness, frustration, but they're expressed very differently if it's an environment that I trust versus an environment that I don't trust. Let's talk about that a little bit. How have you seen that play out? Like just sadness, frustration in different environments. One where maybe there's a lack of trust, could be because of trauma, it could be because of anxiety, it could be because a variety of things, in a place where there is that trust, that safe environment.
Well, I think one of the things that we need to consider is, how do we feel like we trust somebody? Like, what is needed in that relationship in order to feel like I feel safe, I feel like I can trust this person? What do we need? Well, we need the same things our kids need, really. We need to know that they heard us, that this person is seeking to understand me. A lot of times that even comes in how we are interacting with our child. Are we standing over them all, whenever correction is needed? Are we always kind of at this level, up here to down here? And there's going to be times, they're little, so there's going to be times where it's going to be that's going to be the case.
Right.
But as much as possible, being able to kind of get down at their level, being able to enter into their world where they are, to understand what's happening with them, to let them tell you. One of the things I tell parents all the time is get used to hearing really crazy things from your kids, like irrational things. You have to get used to hearing that and not always feel like you need to correct it immediately. Because even in the parent-child relationship, you are establishing, like you said, that trust of my mom will hear me, my dad will listen to me. Is that what my kids think? Or do they say, my mom's always going to be busy doing, whatever while I'm trying to talk to her, my dad's going to lecture me, whatever it is. We want our kids to understand, like, they're going to hear me, they're going to listen to me. That doesn't mean I agree with them. Just because I'm listening to them does not mean I agree with them.
Validating what they're
and you're
sharing.
Establishing that trust, and you're doing things even positionally in that room, because yes, as parents, by God's design, we have been given authority over our children. But one of the things I've learned in having children through this, all the ages and stages, and now they're adults, is that we start out with a lot of authority and not so much influence. But as they grow, we want that influence to actually grow and that authority to lessen. And that's really hard for parents. Letting go of that authority is so hard, but I promise you, if you gain that influence, it will be so much easier to release that authority, because now your child, you have influence over your child. And they come to you and they say, hey, Dad, what do you think about this? This is what's happening. What do you think? You have influence now. It's not about authority anymore. And so that's establishing that trust and helping them see that, yeah, you're going to listen to them, not always going to agree with them. And there will come a time then that you get to say, you know what, son, or you know what, sweetie, what you're telling me, I hear you, but it is absolutely in disalignment with what God's word says. So I want to talk with you in that. I want to walk with you. I want to help you understand that better. And if you've established that trusting relationship, they will give you that space as well. So one of the things that my husband and I committed to when our kids were younger is when we had to bring correction or conversation that was hard, we were committed to ending every conversation, letting them know, we love you and God loves you. We are for you and God's for you. So some kind of a conversation like that would always happen at the end of, and we usually would pray with them, even if they didn't always want us to. Establishing those ways to build that trust, that love, even when you hear things that you don't necessarily agree with.
So important. Because sometimes the authoritarian side, the one where it's all rules, it's out of fear. And we see in Scripture that God continually is telling us to not be afraid, because he wants to reassure us of the trust he gives.
Absolutely.
And the trustworthiness of his love for us. But he doesn't fix our emotions, and neither do we need to do that as parents. We don't need to fix our kids' emotions. We get to understand them, get to lean into that with our kids, but not resolving it. Sometimes there's so much satisfaction for a child and an increase in trust in themselves when they learn to power through frustration or boredom or big emotions, negative emotions. And the first impulse of a parent, naturally, is to, man, I want my child to be happy, I want him to feel good. And culture keeps pushing for that somehow life's supposed to be comfortable, full of pleasure, and happy all the time. Some of the richest treasures are found in the difficulties and the challenges of life. And what I see in the culture today for parents is this pressure to create just happiness, happy moments, happiness, this sense of anxiety that I need to create the most amazing home, otherwise my kids might not like me enough, might not love me enough. We need to really explore that ourselves, in ourselves as parents. What's happening inside of me? How are my own emotions influencing the way that I guide my child? Am I guiding out of fear, or am I guiding out of value and desire for what's best for my child? And sometimes it is those moments of pain where my child can be sad or they can be upset, and it's okay. And I'm there with them as they're trying to manage the wobbliness of those big emotions. And I picture that 8-year-old, that 9-year-old, that 10-year-old, where they're all of a sudden in this negative place. For parents, that can be, especially if the child has been very positive all along, and all of a sudden they hit this wall. You're like, oh my goodness, my child is all of a sudden saying all these negative things, don't hit the panic button. Go into that and go, hey, what do you see? Help me see it from your perspective. I just want to understand it a little bit better.
That's good.
And if they say, well, I think that these kids think of me this way, or I was late to class, and most of the time when they describe why they feel the way they feel, it makes sense with the way they see it.
Yeah.
And so maybe ask them the question, is there another way to look at that?
That's good. I like that.
Maybe you'll feel different if you see it differently. Let's explore it out of curiosity.
Yeah, you brought up something that really resonated with me. Fear is a big deal for parents, and we do want the best for our kids. And that is probably one of the regrets that I have as a parent. Definitely not a perfect parent at all. By the way, there is no such thing as a perfect parent.
No.
And so we should stop striving for that. Let's just end that.
Because love can be there, right?
Exactly, and grace. But I remember feeling there were times for sure of, what am I motivated by here? I'm motivated, not just fear of I want to create this great environment for my kid, but at the root of that, I had to explore what was going on inside of me. And so as we work with our kids, it's always an opportunity. God is always saying, like, what's happening in you right now as you're parenting them? What's going on inside of you, Eliza? Because are you trusting me? You want your child to trust God. But are you trusting me? Do you trust me enough to let him struggle a little bit in this? Do you trust me enough to not have the answers? And a lot of the fear had a lot to do with, what do people perceive of me as a parent? And I think we put way too much of that pressure on one another. Like this parenting journey can often feel so competitive. We just need to like end that. Like, we're not trying to compete with one another.
Because then you feel like, I can't trust you with me. Are you judging me in my parenting? That's a big topic in social media, feeling judged. And so there are a lot of parents that aren't trusting the other people's opinions about their parenting. And there is this pressure of having to be the better parent, or maybe they're creating better experiences. This trust component, if you're relational with your child, if you're intentional and you get to know them and you're attentive and attuned with them, really what you begin to see, you were talking about the word influence. That's really what our goal is over time, instead of controlling. And that's where the fear can come in. When our child is making poor decisions.
Oh yeah, we want to control it.
When our child is reflecting poorly on us. When our child is failing at something, it's super uncomfortable. And those are the moments where maybe we can go get some help emotionally.
For sure.
When our child is struggling like that, and the reminder, like you said, can I trust God to help my child through this? And can I be transformed by it, that I don't have to look perfect?
Yeah.
That this is a place so necessary for my child, and it's going to increase our trust. And if a child starts to share something with you as a parent, you got to guard that. A lot of times in those teen years, I see parents sharing with other parents in their group, or they say, hey, can you pray for this? And in that context, they're kind of bringing something that maybe they didn't ask their child about, especially that teenager that maybe shared something really, really specific that they don't want other people to know about. Check in with them and say, hey, I want to get some prayer on this. Do you mind if I ask some people to pray? Because you want to guard that trust, especially if it's there and they're sharing deep things in their emotional state. That can be really amazing for them. They'll respect the fact that you asked instead of just sharing it. And they're hearing you're on the phone telling people, hey, this is happening. Can you be praying for my son? It's, what? Why are you sharing that with Aunt whatever, right?
Right.
So just be mindful of that.
I think that's really good, even as, we're kind of talking about as your kids get a little bit older in those teen years and stuff, I do think there's value even in being able to relinquish some of your parental authority, if you will, to other people who are trusted in your child's life.
Like
and
mentors,
so, letting them
children's pastors, youth pastors.
Exactly. Letting them see that, like, I remember having a conversation with one of our kids, and they disagreed with what we were saying, and we said, you know what? We are fine if you want to share everything that we just shared with you with somebody that we would agree, that we would trust as somebody who could speak into your life, whether it's this person or that person, that you talk to these people in your church or our kids were involved in different volunteer activities in the community. This person's a great mentor. Why don't you run it by them? And you're free to tell them, like, I think my mom and dad are crazy for thinking this or whatever. Just letting them have that space of, like, explore it with somebody else, because in that you're actually modeling for them, like, there's wisdom in a multitude of counselors, and we have blind spots. And parents, we need to, as parents, we need to be able to recognize, like, I'm going to do this wrong.
Yeah.
And letting your kids, even at younger ages, letting them know, like, sometimes I do it wrong, apologizing to your child when you do it wrong, but also being able to say, but this is our conviction. We're following the Lord in this, and it's going to look sometimes like the way you don't want it to look.
Well, I love it. That's so key.
Yeah.
I think the other piece with the trust with younger kids, maybe explore that a little bit. If there's some big emotions, ask them, what feels unsafe to you? In either in your room or in the house or with your friends or with us. Help me understand that part a little bit more, because I'm seeing these emotions that tell me that maybe you're trying to protect yourself. So look at the behaviors and what they may be telling you about what they're trying to do, and then explore that emotion a little bit. That'll give you even more information as a parent. And then say, hey, it seems to me that maybe you're feeling like things, you might get hurt by somebody, or things might be very unfair, and help me see it from your perspective. And for some kids, then all of a sudden they start sharing, and that's very relieving of some of the emotions, because they don't know how to put it into words, and you're helping them put it into words, so they become good communicators down the road in a trusting relationship. And
in a sense, we're modeling what we want them to then transfer to the Lord.
Yes.
Like, that's really our desire is, yes, I want you to feel safe and trusted here, but I want you to know that there is a God who loves you, who you can trust, who will take care of you, who understands you, who actually gave you those feelings that you have, those feelings that sometimes you don't always know what to do with and can be overwhelming at times. And so taking them to the Lord and allowing them to see that that's how you do it too. I mean, and that's what we need to do as parents, right? We need to because let's face it, sometimes our big emotions come because our kids had big emotions.
Yes.
And now I've got all these big emotions. Well, am I doing what I want my child to do? Am I taking those back to the Lord and saying, Lord, I'm overwhelmed? That's why I love the Psalms so much. They give us such a picture of emotional expression. I'm exhausted, I'm overwhelmed, I'm fearful, I don't know what to do, those kind of things. And God gives us those words, and he meets us in those places. And so part of that is not just saying, it's not just about you and I, it's actually about what I find in Christ, in God, our Father, who takes care of us, who understands us, who knows our frame, and yet also directs us and guides us and leads us into the right path as well.
That's wonderful. I do think that from an early age, God's design is just perfect and incredible.
Yeah.
And, he designs us with those empathy neurons to start off with as infants.
Yeah.
Being able to experience another person's emotions and mirror those. And sometimes infants are reacting to our own emotions. They're a mirror to the emotions we have as parents.
And toddlers.
As you're showing up, and toddlers.
Yeah.
But with infants, maybe you're angry, upset, or you're arguing with your spouse, and they're starting to cry. It's because it's so overwhelming, the amount of emotion that they're having to process and empathize with, and they have no words for it. They have no context for it. They just know it's big.
Yeah.
And so realize that if you have an infant, they're absorbing the emotions that are in your home.
Yeah.
And they're giving you a little mirror into that. As they get older, I think a real good tool for us as parents to think about is, and I'm going to do this with my grandkids now.
Yeah.
I've got 21 and 19, and now it'll be grandkids down the road. Asking them, how do you think this person feels? And we did this with my kids. We'd be watching a movie, I'd press pause, and I'd say, okay, how do you think that person feels? And that person feels. And then at school, if there was somebody, maybe we're at a sporting event or something like that, I'd say, hey, what do you see on the outside of that person? What do you think they're feeling? What's their experience? Then if they were with their friends, I would say, what do you think it was like to be with you today?
That's a good question.
What did people feel around you? Did they feel welcome, loved? What do you think it was like for them, their experience? Like for you right now, you're having a different experience than me as we're interviewing. And so everyone has different ways that they're processing and feeling let's open up that world to our kids, because naturally they don't have that. They're experiencing the world through their lens. But we can help expand that through questions and through just pausing and playfully saying, hey, did you notice that person's face? What do you think is happening? Maybe it was somebody that was kind of grumpy.
Yeah.
And you're going on an airplane. Maybe they're the stewardess, and you go, man, I wonder how their day's going. I wonder what was happening there.
Yeah,
what
you're
do you
getting
think they're
curious
feeling?
about these
curiosity.
things. Yeah.
And asking those questions at different places, rather than criticizing the emotions that people are having.
Or even assuming what they're having. And I think we as parents can do that. We aren't curious, and we just assume, oh, they're angry, or they're just disappointed in this or whatever. Or we don't know. Maybe they're afraid. Maybe they're confused. So when we don't ask or explore these things with our children, we just assume, and we do that with one another as well. And I mean, let's just face it, it's challenging, because we've got our own emotions, as we've already talked about. And I would say to parents too, just keep in mind that if your child is struggling, you mentioned early on, there's often many components to that. The one thing that I do want to encourage parents is, if your child's struggling, it doesn't mean you're a bad parent. It means you're a parent, and you've got a child who is struggling, and maybe the next one will struggle in different ways or whatever. And I think too many times, you mentioned social media and what it looks like. I think we can be hard on our kids and say, like, oh, some of the struggles that you have are because of social media. And that's another conversation we could have for sure. But I think sometimes the struggles we have as parents are because of our own exposure to social media. And we can feel like, well, I failed them because I didn't ask them these questions, or I didn't, do these things that we've talked about. There is grace, and God is bigger than our parenting experience that we've had. For some parents, maybe they're at a space where they're like looking back and say, it's too late. But I would encourage you and say, no, it's not. Even for those adults, and I know this is more we're talking about younger kids, but as your kids become adults, you still have opportunity to begin to walk with them in ways that you maybe wish you would have earlier on. So there's grace for that, and I do think it's a long road. People talk about that all the time. The years go by so quickly, for sure, but the days can feel so long at times, for sure.
Yeah, and parents carry insecurities. I mean, everybody does, right? Everybody's carrying them all day long, and sometimes emotions trigger those emotions popping up, and the perceptions of how we're seeing things trigger our own insecurities, and so. One tool that I've loved to use with teenagers is looking at the nonverbals, the body language. Oh yeah,
those are huge.
Because sometimes we're subconsciously triggered by another person's body language, and it's interesting to learn that about ourselves.
Yeah.
And a fun activity to do with your teenager next time you guys are locked up is to stand at the mirror and watch yourself, and your teenager watches themselves. And then you communicate what you're trying to communicate. And what's interesting is you start to regulate your nonverbals, because you don't like seeing certain things, certain movements in your own face and your own body. And so that's one way to regulate that. Find ways to show up in a way that's going to create that trust and that connectedness with the emotions. This has been a great conversation, Eliza. Thank you for your insights, your thoughts around this.
Absolutely.
So much more we could talk about. And I do think that the bottom line here is that we do need to not ignore the fact that we have a lot of emotions in our home.
Yeah.
And let's explore the treasures in there.
And do it together. We get to do it together. That's the beautiful thing about parenting, is they're teaching us things as well. And sometimes what we need to do is co-regulate. So it's a word we use in the counseling world, where we do it together. You're upset. I'm getting upset because you're upset. So maybe we actually learn to regulate together, go to the Lord together, seek out the better ways to navigate these interactions together.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And parents, if you really enjoyed this conversation, just know we have some other resources for you. One is our age and stage content. You can find it at mykidsage.com, and you'll have content sent to you, the ages of each of your kids, and it's what to expect, what to build, how to grow, and it'll show up just around the birthday of each of your kids, and then you'll get weekly parenting tips in a newsletter that you will absolutely love. So make sure you sign up at mykidsage.com.